trying to bridge the generational divide and cultural divide. So this is Rolf Bachmann.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rolf Bachmann. I thought I'd start off by giving you some of my own history, that I also have a mixed racial background. My father was born in Germany, and at the age of 16 he won a scholarship to become an engineer in America, after which he then came to Australia to build the Snowy Houses Mountain Scheme. After years of travelling as an engineer, a failed first marriage, my father decided to travel back to Germany and find himself a good German wife. My mother was born in the Philippines. After finishing her university, she decided to take a job offer being promoted by the German government to work in the hospital system in Germany. After nearly 10 years in Germany, my mother bumped into my father with the equivalent of the RTA, and the rest, as they say, is history. I was almost born in Brisbane, until my mother, once they migrated to Australia, turned around and said that if she wanted to live in a precipice with 1,000 mosquitoes, she would have never go to the Philippines. So, moving to a more temperate climate, they discovered Canberra, and then thus I was born in the late 70s. From the very beginning, I wondered why people did things differently from my family. Initially, my grandparents came over from the Philippines to help look after us while my parents went to work. This prototype of the family daycare system was so popular that other families in the street also brought their children along. And so that I was raised with about 10 or 12 other children, to which this day I'm still friends with. But I think the first time I really realised that I was different from other people, that my background was different from the rest of people, was the first time I had a school lunch at kindergarten. Food, as we've learned tonight, is a very important part of culture, all cultures. And I happily tell everybody that I grew up on schnitzels and rice. In the school setting, being different can easily translate into a negative experience. So you can imagine one of the first times sitting there at lunch, when I pulled out my egg and mayonnaise sandwich, my mother's idea of what an Australian sandwich should be was a very different thing from the Vegemite, honey, or peanut butter sandwiches of my peers. I had all the other children holding their noses, running away, talking about what the awful smell it was. But at least then it wasn't noodles with cling wrap or fried fish. Those came later. Over the years, as I began to spend more time with other children, and they began to spend more time at my house, again it began to highlight the differences between the different cultures that I was experiencing. The way other kids spoke to their parents, in particular, say, going to an Australian family and hearing a child swear in front of their parents, was a very interesting thing to observe and something that never happened in my household. And of course, food, again talking about that. The German tradition of you eat what's in front of you versus my Filipino tradition of when you empty the plate it means you want more, was something that I had to reconcile. And bringing people to my house was a lot of activity in the kitchen. My mother had to ensure that she never undercooked for any of our guests that were there. Picky eating is not something my mother was used to. In fact, not eating something of her food is a bit of a slight in Filipino culture. But my mother was determined that no one went away from her house hungry, even if that meant she had to whip up something else for a particularly petite child. The flip side of this being that when I went to other people's houses, and you can read that as other Australians, when we finished dinner, seconds was something to be contemplated and not something to be expected. So something, again, that was extremely unusual to me. In this way, I saw the way my parents did things as far superior, and of course, or at least more satisfying. However, we talked about that duality and that having these different cultures. Travelling to my parents' birth countries, as well as highlighted to me how Australian I actually am. The German love of planning, formality, and the following of rules has meant that whilst I love my German heritage and will happily proclaim that, I'm not particularly close to my family there. In fact, the family that I stay with in Germany have been my Filipino relatives that have migrated there. The Philippines, being a much closer country, is the country that I travel to the most. The Filipino attitude of take it as it comes, the massive response to elder respect, and the supporting of families comes with its up and down. I can turn up to a family member's doorstep and fully expect to be fed, looked after, and the mention of staying with a hotel is not only met with derision, but anger and disappointment that I didn't ask that relative first. The downside of this expectation is that it can be extremely draining for me as an Australian, in a country that places so much emphasis on the individual and your own individual accomplishments and achievements. that all of a sudden I have to accommodate my family's needs as the rich cousin, and that it's automatically expected that I pay for dinner, buy clothes, and perhaps even pay for my cousin's children's education. Growing up in Australia, I have been exposed to a rich tapestry of culture. Not just exposed to it, but invited to be part of it. Particularly around the table there, we're talking about the different celebrations that we have. Chinese New Year's, American 4th of July, the White Saturday celebrations, which speaks to the Tongan culture. Then again, the other, just everyday celebrations, the birthdays, the weddings, the anniversaries, all these other things. And again, a lot of this circulates around food. I love my cultural origin, but I love the fact that as an Australian, I am free to choose what is best for me. And it is this freedom that I believe makes Australia such an attractive place to settle. The Bureau of Statistics estimated that in 2014, the top 5 countries that people were born in outside of Australia was the UK, New Zealand, China, India, and the Philippines. 16% of Australians identify with a country of birth other than Australia. Take away the UK and NZ, and that leaves close to 9%. So approximately 10% of our population identify with a culture very different from that of Australia. My own upbringing perhaps means that I can empathise with people that come from different cultures. And in particular, when I'm supporting families that come from a different culture, other than Australia, I often find that perhaps the biggest thing that I have to manage is expectations. And that moves across all cultures. The families that I deal with are often families that are already at risk, are experiencing homelessness, have difficulty finding jobs, have difficulty navigating the various systems that Australia has instituted. So, one of the biggest things that we encounter is, in fact, dealing with the education system. It was discussed today about the parental expectation that they put upon their children, especially if newly arrived Australians, and not really understanding that the educational pathways available to the young people that are in Australia. These things can include CIT, apprenticeships, traineeships, even on workplace training can be considered towards education. Experiences outside of the norms of people from other countries. Other things that we have to expect, other things that I've encountered in my days dealing with families. The managing of religious expectations, the family expectation of obligations to be supported by their children. Mixed race dating has always been a fun one that I've had with families. And in discussion that, so what can we do? And what do we find out? The model of engagement that we use is something that's called strength-based that we work with these different families. And the idea of strength-based is that we look towards the goals of what people want. And so when working with families, in particular families that have come from other countries, one of the first things that I will do is sit down with that family and say, what is it that you want? What is the goal for you? And what is the goal for your children? And one of the things we might unpack and explore is, what was your purpose for migrating to Australia? What was the goal? And again, we've discussed here on this panel today about how the goal to move here was to allow for that freedom of choice, to allow for those opportunities in education, to allow for this different lifestyle that they so craved when they decided to move here. And I can see how that one of the biggest things that Australia offers is the freedom of choice that's not readily available in other countries. And this in itself becomes a barrier for these families. When faced with these freedoms afforded to all Australian young people, it can be quite intimidating, if not scary for families, to be told that they have to let their child start making decisions for themselves. When you come from a culture where complex family relationships are the dictate of everything that goes on, it becomes extremely difficult to then say, actually, you must suspend that. The families that I work with, is one of the first things that says that you shouldn't be suspending that, but you should be learning to adapt what that means in Australia. How do you instill in your children a rich sense of the culture and their heritage, as we said, giving them the space to be proud of where it is that they come from, but at the same time ensuring that that is compatibility with the Australian oversight of the overarching culture of Australia. I guess one of the big things I keep putting out there is I ask a lot of questions here, because at the end of the day, these answers have to come from the family. It's about the individuals and how they work, and the goals that they have to have. So, one of the things that I will leave you with is that when you're dealing with that, so even in your own situations, what is your goal? What is the end result that you are aiming for? What is it that you want for your children? What have you sacrificed to get there? What else are you willing to give up? And so at the end of the day, and what things, when you think about that, and think about things that you're willing to give up for those goals to your children.